When it comes to mission trips, a good rule of thumb is to be adaptable. Volunteers adapt to new tasks, new cultures, maybe even a new relationship with God. But how does that attribute relate to an organization? Today we'll look at how adapting to challenges shaped our work and created even greater opportunities for service. First, we'll go to an area of the world that had been largely untouched by Maranatha and witness the ongoing impact.
Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and India. Maranatha's work in these places helped establish a track record for tackling seemingly impossible projects and working in places previously closed to the gospel. But there was one area of the world that had received very little help from the organization, the continent of Africa. Although small, one-off projects had been done, Maranatha had not entered any of the countries in Africa with a wide-reaching, systematic approach. With the immense church growth happening across the continent, it was time for Maranatha to embark on a new faith journey.
The church on the continent of Africa is growing faster than virtually any other place in the world. We've seen that growth amazingly, sometimes 50,000 a month. It's just huge. And you say, how can they sustain that? How can they hold those people together? The only way it's going to work is they have to have places for people to meet, they have to educate the people. Without infrastructure, it'll never happen, and they don't have the resources to do it.
After several years of requests, talks began with Adventist church leadership in Southern Africa about how Maranatha could best respond to their needs.
And we said, where do you want us to start? Well, please start in one of our toughest areas, Mozambique.
At the time, Mozambique was the poorest country in southern Africa. The nation was still reeling from the effects of 15 years of civil war, and that included the Adventist Church. In 2006, there were more than 200,000 Adventist members in the country, but only 13 proper church structures. The majority of members found themselves worshiping under trees or in basic stick structures. Civil war had decimated Mozambique's education system, and only 39% of the country was literate. The need was clear, and Maranatha committed to building 1,000 churches as well as several schools. Work began in and around the capital city of Maputo. Operating in Africa came with a steep learning curve. Many of the church sites were in remote areas, and the lack of infrastructure in the country presented new complications. It was often difficult to acquire building materials, or even something as basic as water. But the environment challenged the organization to develop new building approaches and ways of working. This expanded Maranatha's ability to respond to the need. On February 24, 2007, the very first church was dedicated in the village of Kampuane. The group joyously celebrated the move from their tarp-covered shelter and into their brand new church.
I believe that only in heaven we will be able to imagine what this will cause in the church here. It's something that we cannot imagine, man. This is a new day, a new beginning for the church here. And, as I mentioned, they will come from a mentality after war, low self-esteem. And now they will start to believe we are a church, we have a church.
This celebration would be replicated hundreds of times, as Maranatha spread the hope of proper places to worship all over the country. A year later, the first school opened in the neighborhood of Liberdade. Helping to rebuild the Adventist education system from the ground up wasn't easy, but the schools Maranatha constructed continue to provide quality Christian education to thousands of children. The schools were not the only centers for learning. Once provided with proper structures, local churches began organizing adult literacy classes to help improve the lives of their members and the community at large. And after discovering the immense need for clean water in the country, Maranatha began drilling water wells at its church and school sites. Maranatha's work in Mozambique offered more than 700 volunteers the opportunity to not only participate in a project that was changing the face of a country, but also experience cultural elements unique to Africa.
When you're in rural Africa and you're out worshiping with a congregation in a rural village, there's not too much that beats that. It's pretty special.
The combination of providing education, water, and spiritual shelter turned these buildings into powerful centers of influence in their communities. And as Maranatha's work concluded in Mozambique, it was only natural to continue this effective blueprint in other areas on the continent.
As Maranatha responded to the initial request to work in Mozambique, we really didn't know where that would lead. And that is typical for our response. We respond to a request and we get started and we see where God leads us. And so in Mozambique, we built about 1,000 churches, a little bit under that, 800 wells, a number of big schools. And then we moved on to Malawi, where we built 1,000 churches. And then we moved over to Zambia and built hundreds of churches, Zimbabwe, hundreds of churches, a bunch of schools. We moved to Angola, where we did a major project to build churches and schools. And we worked in some of the other surrounding countries to a smaller scale. But we didn't really anticipate that would happen when we started. But as God led us through, it became evident that this was a need that the church had for infrastructure.
Today, Maranatha has worked in 19 of the 54 countries in Africa. Currently, there are projects running in Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, and Zambia. In Africa, more than 500,000 people gather for worship each Sabbath in a Maranatha church. More than 20,000 students study in a Maranatha school. And more than 900 communities now have access to clean water, thanks to a Maranatha well. But the true impact of these projects is not in the numbers. It is in the lives of the people that have been changed, not only here on this earth, but for eternity.
Huge growth. People are accepting. They're accepting of the message of Jesus Christ. They want to be citizens of the kingdom of God. They want Jesus to come back, but they need some help. So we're there to help them, and that's really the core of it.
Coming up, see how simple structures maximized Maranatha's ability to respond to the immense need for churches and schools.
For For more than a decade, Maranatha Mission Stories has taken you around the world, showing you the need and challenging you to get involved. Now, we're introducing new ways for you to stay informed and inspired about the mission. Watch your favorite episode of Maranatha Mission Stories, as well as other Maranatha videos on your Apple TV. Visit the App Store, search for the Maranatha channel, and hit install. You'll have access to all of our latest video content, and you can watch anytime. Our videos are available on demand 24 hours a day. Our content can also be viewed on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. The Maranatha Channel, bringing mission adventures to your living room.
Imagine receiving requests from 100,000 congregations around the world, all of them begging for an adequate place to meet for worship. Not only that, they also need 80,000 classrooms to provide Christian education to their children. The numbers are staggering, but God used Maranatha, along with a few talented individuals, to tackle the need by revolutionizing the landscape of church construction.
By the mid-2000s, Maranatha Volunteers International had established itself as the go-to organization for church and school construction all over the world. But despite the hundreds of buildings that were being constructed, the immense need was still looming.
We had over 100,000 requests here, and there's no way that we were making enough progress toward accomplishing a large percentage of those. How do we get more done with less money, less time, and move this thing along? Because how will we ever meet the great need, for the churches, the schools, the buildings around the world?
The structures Maranatha had been building often took months to complete. But what if you could give a congregation a new church in just one day?
The initial concept actually happened in the living room of Garwin and Marilee McNeilis. Garwin and I specifically were sitting across from each other saying, how do we do this? And Garwin, who always has a good idea, he says, well, I've got an idea. So let's do it simply.
The McNeilis family, along with Adventist Laymen's Services and Industries, or ASI, were already heavily involved in addressing the huge need for proper places of worship. This included a program called Roofs for Africa. Tens of thousands of congregations across the continent had received roofing material, but the program had some deficiencies.
We were putting roofs on structures, but they were deteriorating through the years because of the elements. Well, Don, have we ever tried building a church from the roof down, like a carport type? And then the locals who can burn the bricks, they can make the sides, they can do that, and that doesn't take a hard currency.
You don't do the whole thing, you don't spend the tens of thousands of dollars to build a complete church, but you get them down the road and they can see, because there's the structure, they can see what it takes to finish it. And maybe they would be able to do that. That was the idea behind it, is to be able to get more done with less money to impact more of the world faster.
So we give it a little thought, and that was really the birth of the One Day Church.
Garwin, who was in the manufacturing business, immediately began working on prototypes in his shop. The structure needed to be lightweight, but strong, easy to construct, and something members would be able to finish with local materials. On June 19, 2008, the very first one-day church was constructed in Valle Hermoso, Ecuador. In an unprecedented event, work began on the structure in the morning, and the first service was held mere hours later. This was the beginning of a revolution. As word spread of this new program, requests began to pour in. Congregations were amazed that after years of prayer, a place of worship could be provided in just one day. Something very simple was making a huge impact.
It might look simple in their eyes, but it is big in this community because it has never happened before. The people have never seen such a structure here. You see, even the houses around, if you have to move around, there are no iron sheets around. You just use the grass and stuff like that. So when they see just this simple structure, it's not simple as it may look like. It is big. It will go a long way.
This one-day church will change in the way the community look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the way they perceive us, that we are no longer a people in this community who have a grass-thatched church for many, many years and unfinished building. This church will mark an identity of confidence in the God whom we worship. Amen. That we worship a living God.
Amen. Having a proper structure in this area actually is evangelism on its own. Because like now we are doing here at Luenge, Maranatha is giving us this structure. It becomes easier for me even to evangelize because just the structure itself will be preaching to the people around here. Already people are already coming here, seeing what is happening. They just hear the noise here, the works that are going on. People already asking, what is happening there? What is happening there? Then they believe that now we are worshiping a true God because they have given us a structure. Then the people will just come on their own.
Maranatha and ASI worked together to erect structures around the world. The program also forged a partnership with the local congregation. Instead of handing them a completed sanctuary, members were able to invest sweat equity into their church, working together to finish it with their chosen materials.
Getting that local congregation involved is one of the things that this program has done that I think is really positive. It also has allowed us to go into countries and do much larger numbers of projects. And we've looked back, we haven't gone to every place that we've built these projects, but what we hear anecdotally and sometimes actually being there, what we hear is that in the main, the locals are finishing up these projects. They can sometimes do more than they ever thought that they could because they rally together, they spend time in prayer, they commit their resources, and all of a sudden they've done something great for God, and it's good for them. So perhaps that's an unexpected positive out of the program.
As requests ramped up, so did financial support for the program. The structure created a low barrier of entry financially, something individuals, Sabbath school classes, and church congregations could easily sponsor.
First of all, the one-day church was ordained in heaven. I believe God had the idea. And the timing was ideal. The economy was contracting at that time, and people thought, I can do a one-day church. I can sponsor that. I can give a home to a church family. So it was fitting for that time and today.
People want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to be important in what they do, but they want to be part of something bigger. And this is something bigger, and they could see some actually large numbers of things happen to help entire countries in a fairly short period of time.
The one-day church program caught the attention of the World Church. It had very good support and still does today.
2 years after the program began, it was time to expand.
So if you're going to build a one-day church, why not a one-day school? The difference being, when you're done with that school, you're not sitting around waiting for a congregation to put the walls up. You got to have it done and ready for those kids to go to school now. So the difference became a more expensive project, included walls, windows, doors, the whole thing, so that when we were done, the building was done. It wasn't waiting for a congregation or a school group to finish it up.
Garwin, once again, began designing school classrooms that could be quickly erected. The prototype for the school was unveiled in 2010 at the Seventh-day Adventist Church's World Business Session. The very first campus of one-day school classrooms was constructed in January 2011 in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. For more than 20 years, local church members had been praying that God would provide opportunities for Christian education in their community.
When I met the lady who since the 80s had been coming over here and praying for a school and seen this beautiful piece of property and how the church supported it so, I thought this would be an ideal place to come back and start. This is the start of what I think will be a complete change in structural buildings for schools.
We have had this land for close to 15 years trying to build, put up one block. This is indeed a dream come true.
In the midst of the construction, registration for the new school opened on campus. Hundreds of families flocked to the school to secure a place for their children. In mere days, classrooms rose out of the ground, and the school was ready to dedicate.
We are so overwhelmed because when this dream came about, we never imagined that it would come through. We want to thank God for His blessings. I can foresee a future with a generation which has a conscience, okay? A generation which knows about God, a generation which fears God, a generation which will be ready to serve on behalf of the Master.
For more than 10 years, the One Day Church and School program has been impacting communities all over the world. The structure has been adapted to fit needs on hospital campuses and has even served as shelter in disaster relief situations. What started as a conversation in a living room amplified Maranatha's ability to spread the gospel through the construction of urgently needed buildings.
The thing that gets me excited about this building and churches, it is a way of ministering through this process. But I tell you what gets me excited, souls for eternity. That's what does it.
Although the need is still daunting, Maranatha is unrelenting in our work to provide urgently needed buildings. But we need your help. Please make a donation to support church and school construction around the world. Call the number on your screen or visit maranatha.org to give.
Elizabeth used to spend hours fetching water for her family. The nearest well was several kilometers away, and every day she had to make at least 3 trips there and back. Today, Elizabeth's life is different. Maranatha Volunteers International drilled a well in her village. Now, her access to water takes only minutes, which means Elizabeth has more time and more water. Enough to plant fruit trees and a vegetable garden. Life is changing for Elizabeth and her family, thanks to water. Give water, give life.
In 5 decades, God has shaped Maranatha's ability to broaden our impact to faraway places using the most innovative means. But it's not about location or the type of structure. Our mission is to reach people. It's about congregations who now have a place to meet for worship. Children who can now study. People who will be ready when Jesus comes.